Um, Hi, everyone. Had fun yesterday? Good dinner? Anybody get the fish? I thought it was seasoned perfectly. Um, Very excited to be speaking with Melissa today, and we're going to jump into her. I'll give you the quick intro for me and for Mars, and then we'll get right into the fun stuff. So I am the Chief Growth Officer a little over 2 months now at the Mars Agency. And if you don't know who Mars is, we are the largest privately held, independent, connected commerce company in the world. We are global. We are based out of Detroit, offices all over the place. And we work with clients like Anheuser-Busch, Campbell's Soup, Henkel, a bunch of CPG companies, and some retailers as well. We run retail media sales for Walmart Canada, 7-Eleven in the US, and Tractor Supply Company, among many other things. But that's a little bit about us. But let's talk about Melissa because that's more interesting, right? Thank you for joining us. Let me tell you a little bit about Melissa so she doesn't have to talk about herself the entire time and then go from there, if that's cool.
Sounds good.
All right. So Melissa joined the Hawks organization in 2014. She oversees the day-to-day operations of the club's marketing, Hawks Studios, live experience, production, brand merchandising, entertainment industry relations, community impact, and basketball programs. And she's a mom. So she's a superwoman, obviously. She started her career with Turner Broadcasting. We heard from her boss yesterday. That was a lot of fun, right? We'll allude to a few of what Steve said and maybe go deeper today. She released her first book in 2020. It's titled From Ball Girl to CMO, available wherever fine books are sold, I'm sure. Um, Among her honors, she was awarded Adweek CMO Award in 2021. She is the American Marketing Association Atlanta chapter. She was recognized with the AMY, am I saying that properly? AMY Lifetime Achievement Award. And she's currently in the 2023 class of Leadership Atlanta and serves on the board of the High Museum of Art and is a member of the Georgia State University Marketing Roundtable. Graduate from Wake Forest. We had a couple alumni at our table last night. And she has a master's degree in design studies, branding from Central St. Martin's College of Art and Design at the London Institute. So very accomplished. We're really excited to hear and learn from Melissa today. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm going to stop talking in a minute, I promise you. In your book, you really talk about your journey going from literally ball girl to CMO. I'm sure you overcame a lot of obstacles like anybody else on that kind of journey. Would love to hear about some of those. What did you face? How did you overcome them?
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you guys for having me. So I'm originally from Miami, Florida, born and raised, first generation American. My parents are from Belize and Jamaica, so I had no connection to American sports whatsoever. My father watched cricket and the Ladies of Glow, for those of you who know what that was. So big wrestling fan, but that was it. And so at 15, my mom said I can get a job and whatever I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I'd started watching basketball with one of my cousins who was very much into the Miami Heat. I didn't know the sport, so she explained it to me, and I really became a fan. But I watched basketball like people watch soap operas. It was the storylines and the television of it that made it interesting. Never played basketball a day in my life. And so I told her I was going to become the first female coach in the NBA because when I watched these games on TV, I saw no women on the sidelines. She said, okay, go get a job in the NBA. And so that's what I did. Wrote a bunch of letters, called them so much. They said, if you call us one more time, we're not going to hire you. And so I stopped for a little bit and I kept on calling and then ultimately got a call back from the equipment manager who really tried to discourage me. He was like, it's tough work. It's mopping sweat, it's folding towels, it's coming early, it's staying late. You got to have good grades. And oh, by the way, it doesn't pay. You work for tips at the end of the night if the whole group does a good job. And I didn't care because at that point I didn't have a choice. My mom kind of laid it down. It was either that or nothing. And so I kept on pursuing it. And ultimately he called me in for my first preseason game ever at the then Miami Arena. Had never been to the game before at all. Didn't know how to rebound because I hadn't played. And they were like, hey, go rebound. And so I learned a lot very, very quickly. And it was really just the art of the hustle, like getting in, trying to learn from assistant coaches, from some of the other ball kids. There was one kid, James, he was the ultimate hustler, had every player's shoes signed and would get tips and do all types of crazy stuff. And so I learned very quickly then. And I think one of the things from that experience that I take to this day is that job was really the opportunity to work with everyone from the owners of the team down to the janitorial staff and security guards and every fan and everyone in between. And how you treated people really mattered and what happened through that. So that was the beginning of my career in sports.
All right. So you mentioned hustle. Love that word. How much do you look for hustle when you're hiring people? What percent of the overall equation do you think hustle is?
I think it matters a lot. But I honestly think, especially working in professional sports, so many people are fans of the sport first. So they'll tell me, I played basketball in college. I'm a huge fan of the team. I know every stat. And I was like, yes, but do you know email marketing? Do you know social? And how much more important it is based on the role and what we're hiring to really be strong in the skill that we are looking for. Because sometimes, depending on the position, you can learn the sport. That's not important. There's so many degrees in sports marketing, which I'm like, you need to know marketing. The sport piece is irrelevant in my opinion, but there's obviously a lot of nuance that comes along with it. So, I look for gaps on the team. I look for people who are smarter than me. Hustle is a big part, but I also have a no jerk policy in everything that I do. So if someone interviews with me and they did a great interview, I'm asking, the admin, I'm asking the person at the front desk what they thought of them, because that really, really matters. And it matters to me and it matters to the culture of what we're building as an organization.
Totally agree. I mean, how many times have we worked with somebody who's awesome, but they leave a trail of bodies in their wake? So I like that policy. That's good. Tell me more, Turner, you spent a number of years there. How did that prepare you for where you are today?
Turner was a really interesting world, and I think even starting out in marketing. So I went to Wake Forest for undergrad. I was a communications major and a studio art minor. And at Wake, they really prepare you for scholarly journal articles and being an academic, truly. And I applied for an internship at Turner Broadcasting, and it was send us your talent in a project. And at the time, I was a graphic designer and an artist. And so I literally designed a TV guide. Sounds so sad now because TV guide doesn't exist. A TV guide all about myself and my brand. And it was me, it was writing samples, art examples, all these things. And I put it together. And they told me that I sold myself so well to them that I would do an amazing job of selling their content to consumers. That's why I got my first marketing job, by marketing myself. And so going into Turner, everyone was a generalist. And that was obviously a long time ago. But you came in, you worked with the analytics team on what the rating should be and who your target audience was. You worked with the PR team on what that strategy was. You worked with the digital team on, what the website, if you were doing sweepstakes. You worked with legal and developed Chiron. You worked out externally with experiential for partnerships. Like, it was really one size fits all. And I'm so grateful for that background and experience, because now it's so segmented and obviously regimented. It needs to be, just with how much, marketing and the marketing world has been proliferated with all the specialties that now exist. But coming into Turner at that time was great. And I think during my 11 years there, I went and did everything from corporate social responsibility at Turner's UK offices in London, coming back and working in on-air graphics for 3 years, helping our design teams for TBS and TNT. You know how, like, you're watching TV and it's like, watch Pretty Woman tonight at 7. I was the one typing tonight, like, next. That was me for years. I hated it. But I learned so much about how television made it to air. And really, I was brought in to be a liaison because I had worked in marketing as an intern. I spoke the marketing language, but I was always an artist. Went to college on an art scholarship. And so because I spoke both creative and marketing, it was a unique skill set that I didn't really realize how special it was. Even today, I can really vouch for my internal agency that we created, as well as the marketing team, and help to have them understand each other. And so a lot of my work at Turner revolved around that. And then ultimately, through doing that and really having that background in brand strategy, when we acquired Core TV, having to do the rebrand from Core TV to True TV, I used to work with Jennifer Dorian, who was here yesterday, interviewing Steve. And so we did that together, a lot of qualitative research, really diving in, understanding why we were rebranding this network, what the needs were, and doing it from soup to nuts, naming agencies, you name it. But there were so many different skill sets built up along the way. And after we did that rebrand, Steve became the president of True TV, which was the new network. There was so much change across the organization. So it started out as he was leading TNT, then TBS, then Turner Classic Movies, then True TV. And every time they did that, we grew efficiencies, which means a lot of jobs, a lot of people were laid off, a lot of empty cubicles. Remember one year we had a cube crawl because it was so empty, we made up bars and we literally drank from cube to cube.
Nice.
And so for 1 year, they brought in an organizational psychologist, and I was the person responsible for working with her to develop corporate culture initiatives, to understand using appreciative inquiry, which was the method, and what would make this the best place for everyone to work between our offices in Atlanta, New York, and LA, which was a very eye-opening experience in culture building. And I think one of the things that probably helped me most till today to really understand the importance of culture in driving business. But then from there, I feel like I did every job under the sun. At one point, I was the director of insights and inspiration, because our internal media team needed consumer insights and media trends and wanting to understand what happened in marketing outside of television. So everyone who's in there individual industry, you get really deep in that industry. And it's like, what's happening at Burning Man? What's happening at Paris Fashion Week? What's happening in music? And so I literally built out a team, and our responsibility was going and capturing all of these best practices to come in and share case studies to help us be smarter on other things. And so that was really the experience up until my final, well, two other ones. One other role was working in business strategy with Cartoon Network and Adult Swim. And for me, that was how do I level up and not just being in brand and brand strategy, but really looking at the time we were looking at taking Adult Swim over the top. So how are we going to monetize that? How we work with our financial modeling teams and really seeing how we grow this brand that has been super successful under the radar and take it to another level. But then we had a digital health and wellness startup called Upwave that no one has ever heard of, because 6 months after it launched, our then CEO of Turner left, and the CFO of Time Warner, the parent company at the time, came in, and it was the last business started and the first one cut. And obviously since then, the company has sold 2 times. So it's evolved as a business, but it was interesting being able to see it coming, especially working on the kids business, because everything from a trend perspective happens to kids first, and then it hits everybody else.
It's wild when you see it coming and everybody sees it coming and you can't stop it.
It was the ice cube that was melting slowly. We would talk about it in every meeting.
Right.
We just didn't know how slow the melt was. And when
Love that
it
analogy.
was very true. I mean, you could see cable subscribers. I remember being in a meeting, man, it had to be like in the early 2010s. And it was like, is anyone a cord cutter? And like, no one raised, who cuts the cord? What do you mean? Now, I mean, it's commonplace. And so because it's impacted, our business on the cable side, especially now, on the sports side as well, it was super interesting to be a part of it and see it happening.
I have two girls, 10 and 12, and they don't know anything except cord cutting. And they were shocked when they finally had to watch regular TV. And like, why can't we just get rid of this commercial?
My daughter was the same.
Right?
She's 8.
It's changed. The world's changed. Let's fast forward to your job now, and actually, but rewind just a little bit and talk about maybe one of the toughest jobs in the country outside of being an EMT during COVID and when it was at its worst. We all avoided public spaces and being around people, and your entire job was getting people to come together in large groups. How the hell did you do that? Like,
We didn't.
you didn't.
Some members of our team, and honestly, that was probably one of the hardest times in my career, because you're right, as the CMO of the Atlanta Hawks and the arena, so that's concerts, it's everything we do. We prided ourselves on the experience of bringing people together for live events. And so when that stopped overnight, I remember the last game we had when the NBA announced, I think it was like in the third quarter, that we were taking a break for whatever this thing was. We had a meeting with our fan and experience team, and we're like, well, we'll see y'all in 2 weeks. And I was like, we may not. So let's just, thank you everybody for what you've done. And people were defeated. And I realized so much of my team gets their joy and their job from seeing fans' experiences and like their faces. It's the most real-time feedback that you can get. And so for a big part of folks, like that really hurt them personally. And, mental wellness was really big, especially in COVID. So for us, we obviously stopped for a while. One of the biggest things as we went into that summer is we were sold out for camps and clinics. So every summer from a youth basketball perspective, with a ton of camps and clinics around the city, we look at it as part of our generational fan building strategy. So we really, really rely on that. And when it stopped in real time, we had to go virtual, digital. And so we had a team who's only been responsible for putting on physical events, very quickly got savvy in digital, working with our digital marketing team and our content group, and put together a platform called Hacks at Home. And that summer we were able to impact more youth playing basketball like at home than we were in many years before trying to do physical camps and clinics. And so there was a lot of benefit from taking things in the physical world and making it virtual. I think as an organization, we talk about voting, and being here and being in Atlanta and understand how important that election was, being able to open up our arena as a big space to gather people distantly to do something like voting, and working with our organization and all of our employees was one of the most amazing things we've been a part of, because it was like a genuine pride in saying, hey, I will volunteer my time and risk my safety to be out here to do something good for our community. And I think it really brought our organization together. The NBA itself obviously put together the bubble, did what they did. We were not a part of that. But when we were able to get back in the arena and play, there were all types of restrictions. So we didn't create those. Those were NBA led, but they were red zones, and every city really had to go based on the jurisdiction of what was feasible. We also wanted to make sure people were safe. I think Atlanta was the most wide open city in the nation. So everybody was here at the club and doing things. We had the All-Star game here. It was such a funny story with Steve. We had All-Star in Atlanta. The NBA asked us if we would host the All-Star game. And I said, it's going to happen, but if it happens here, Atlanta will be out partying We're like, oh, no, 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 it won't. And I was like, no, really, trust me. And she was there, like, I'm like, it's going to happen. I said it like a month before. And then that week, you're like, Melissa was right. They said the PDK, every airport was full with all the private jets, and it was a thing. But for us as an organization, and really even as a marketing team, being able to evolve through that and really figure out what was right at different times, not just for ourselves and visually for our fans. I remember testing was wild because it was all right, everyone has to be tested, and two people that know people. And when we finally made it back, winning helps a lot. And so we ended up being in the Eastern Conference Finals, which when we were opening up our doors for the first time, it was great. That just so happened to be when a lot of the restrictions were lifted and fans could come into the building. And so for us, it was how do we keep people safe, as safe as possible? Obviously, you're opting into that experience, but there's nothing like being together for a live sporting event. As many times as people talk about it and watching it virtual, there's nothing like it.
So you had to change your communication strategy throughout this entire thing.
Multiple times.
A lot of times. So I'm sure you had meetings where you're sitting down, okay, what is our focus for the next X number of days? Like how many different changes did you go through?
I don't even know if we can quantify them. And honestly, as the CDC made changes, we had to flex. As the NBA made changes, we had to flex. Internally, as you know, I remember we were planning, it was like a holiday event. This was a little after COVID, and then one of our players got COVID. So we really had to quickly shift and cancel that and just understand how it impacts not just our employees, but really our team. And that was pretty hard.
So throughout that process and where you got to today, did your marketing mix change as a result of that? Did you lean more into certain channels? How did you adapt?
Well, I think for us, we've always been pretty heavy in digital because we want to be able to convert. And the only way for us to do that is for fans to go on Ticketmaster and buy a ticket. I mean, we can bring awareness out everywhere. I mean, out of home, we didn't do as much. We really turned it off completely during COVID because we weren't driving folks to the arena to buy tickets. Now, we really were supporting our partners as much as possible. So Odyssey, from a radio perspective, was 92.9. And Bally's our television broadcast partner for fans to be able to watch games. And I remember every team having interesting tactics like putting up those cardboard cutouts of fans in the building to make, players feel like they had energy. We didn't go that route, but we did do a lot of different things, in arena for the folks who were there, and really just separation. There was no, no entertainment on court or any of that based on the NBA. But from a marketing mix, we kept it pretty heavy digital and really trying to drive fans to be able to consume our product as much as possible during that time.
Is that where you are today? Is it mostly digital? How would you describe it?
I think it's a pretty healthy mix. We do some out of home, and a lot of that is awareness. And it's an interesting, we pull levers based on what inventory is. And so there's a finite number of tickets to be sold. We have a record number of season ticket members. We've had a record number of sellouts this season as an organization. The team is exciting to watch, but I think our game experience and our fan experience when people come into the building, once they're there, it's electric. And so truly, depending on where we are, and if we need help with certain things, we use a lot of different things as levers, whether it's bringing in entertainment, looking at different halftime shows, a lot of group sales, and some of our folks from our revenue team is here today. But a number of different things, really depending on where we are in the season. We learned this season, actually, a new strategy we've tried is the first half of the season is normally really challenging. We went to Georgia, it's all about football. It's about football until around December, and after Christmas, people are like, oh yeah, there's basketball. But we're playing basketball in October. And so we really looked at how do we incentivize, how do we get out earlier as soon as the schedule is out to get tickets on sale? How do we really work with group sales and try to get as many folks in for that first half of the season in those games? So we did probably a lot more incentive-based marketing than we have in the past, and it worked. And so we were able to really, really thrive at the beginning of the season. And now as we go to the second half, people are amped up for playoffs and play-in and everything else to come next.
So back to sticking to the marketing mix theme, a lot of different channels, a lot of levers to pull. How do you make sense of that? And what's your model? So there's typically you either do it all in-house, you lean on an agency to do it all, or you do the hybrid approach. Where are you guys? How's that evolving?
When I first came to the organization, I wasn't in this position. I was VP of brand strategy, helping to create the brand. But our previous leader, we worked a lot with agencies out of house. We had an AOR, we did our analytics with them, we did our media buying with them, we did everything there. And it worked for the organization at that time. I think we've evolved a ton since then. And so we pretty much do everything in house. We have a
creative too?
Creative as well. We created an internal agency called Hawk Studios. We had maybe 2 designers when I first got there, but the need and the lift grew, especially as the organization and our business grew, whether through corporate partnership needs, through HR needs, basketball programs. Sometimes our basketball operations team is like, hey, we want graphics in our building. We have a head coach now who wants, these words up everywhere, to be able to send a creative director over there in real time to go and do that and handle it. Obviously, work with external production um, partners, but we bring everything in-house. And when we did that, we grew from a personnel standpoint, but we saved so much from an agency perspective. We still go out to freelancers on occasion, especially for video and production needs. Depending on what we're doing, if our big, robust piece of content we do at the beginning of every season, our game open. Sometimes we'll work with external partners to help us with that, but we would be the ones driving it throughout and still sweetening it and doing things internally. But it's been a major shift. And I think for us, and based on the speed that our business shifts, it's been helpful. In addition to that, we have the Hawks, we have State Farm Arena, we have our G League team, the College Park Skyhawks, we have our NBA 2K leagues, we have Hawks Talent Gaming Club. So as we've grown these sub brands underneath, it didn't exist when I first got there. There's much more work to do because even though it's a G League team, we're still selling tickets, we're still promoting an entire season. So the amount of work doesn't change, just the scale of it may.
Are those separate P&Ls or do they combine in any way?
They're separate, but a lot of the personnel we have may work on two projects at the same time, or two campaigns, or two different of the sub brands at the same time. But we've learned that also over time, and it's a consistent learning. We're still trying to figure out the right mix for it. Some it makes sense to go out of house and have a freelancer that may focus on one of the sub brands independently with a full-time person supporting it. But it's a really interesting nuance that we've all learned together in real time within our organization.
So, attribution, I know you did a lot of analytics at Turner. Obviously, you have to do that with your current job. How do you measure success? You have different KPIs. I'm sure they change throughout the year.
Yeah.
How do you handle all that?
Well,
And what tools do you use?
when I first got this job, they said, "What's the job?" It's butts and seats. That's the KPI.
It's a nice way to say it.
Day. But I think we've evolved as an organization. And so we really look at, from a broader KPI perspective, what are our drivers of brand relevance? What are the things that help us know that fans are with us? And when I first got here, you would walk around the city. When I moved to Atlanta, I was actually a ball girl for the Hawks as well that first year as an intern at Turner. And no one wore Hawks gear. No matter where you went, no one was in Atlanta Hawks gear. People were incredibly apathetic around the organization. And so within our drivers of brand relevance, we're looking at retail sales because we'll know if it's making a difference. We'll look at obviously ticket sales. We'll look at ratings. We'll look at social media and where we're having growth. We want to look at local follower growth. There's a lot of folks that follow us in the Philippines, a lot of folks internationally that are fans of the team, but looking at how we grow social local is important, and especially in TikTok and with our current next gen Atlanta target audience. But for us, we're really looking at those drivers more and more on a regular basis just to make sure that we are where we hope we are. Unfortunately, the one thing that I can't control is wins and losses. And so for a basketball team, you see it. When we win, those numbers go up sky high. But we also can find unique ways to build campaigns to help drive them as well.
So you talked about new fans, and there's a whole project research. I think you did some research on that. Fill us in on what that looks like and how are you reaching those new fans?
Well, I mean, we're not completed yet. So as an
Okay.
organization, we are working on an internal study called Project Future Fan. And one of the things that I've seen just in my time, I've been with the Hawks almost 9 years now, is the evolution of our fan base. We came in, and the first thing I did was really help to define our brand strategy. And to do that, we needed a target audience. So we defined our target audience as next generation Atlantans, which most people are like, is that millennial? Is that Gen Xer? Is that Gen Z? And I was like, no, it's next gen Atlanta. It will evolve. And so if anyone in here is from New York, you are going to be a Knicks fan no matter what I do. You bleed orange and blue, I get it, it's cool, it's fine. However, if you live here, you likely have a kid that's born here, and I can do everything in my power to make sure that your kid is a Hawks fan. And so when we first started, that was our strategy. So it was, how do we become the coolest team on NBA 2K? How do we, bring in the coolest new up-and-coming acts that people may not be aware of, but our audience would know? How do we design our uniforms? And I don't know if you were here, you remember our Volt green and feather pattern Atlanta Hawks. I wasn't a huge fan of it, but 9 and 10-year-olds loved it. And that was the strategy. Every adult is like, oh, I can't stand it. We were okay with that because our goal was really to make sure it worked for the kids. And so as we really kind of further define that target audience, now it's getting younger. And I have an 8-year-old daughter who is all around Minecraft and Roblox, and her entire world is through YouTube. And so understanding how we can create our engagement for the fans of the future and the things that we are doing now through, we have a Squawk Squad program, it's kind of our kids club. We still have our camps and clinics. We have a summer camp tour that we're going to people who are not doing basketball camps. They could be at STEM camp. They could be at art camp. How do we give them a glimpse of the Atlanta Hawks to try to get them into our brand universe? We're really, really focused on that. So the study that we're talking about when we finish it. We just finished our qualitative piece where we got some great insights from there, just saying that fandom is changing. You know, I feel like back in the day, if you had parents who were a fan of the team, they told you you're going to be a fan of the team. Now you have millennial parents that are like, oh, whatever you want to be a fan of, it's okay, it's okay. You make your own decisions. And we laugh, but it's so true. And so with that, we see a decline in the number of young people who are fans of teams who want to come out to sporting events. They'd rather be home on Netflix, hanging out, doing their own thing. And so I'm sure the pandemic pushed a lot of that to the forefront as well, but we're learning a lot.
In defense of those parents, I tell my kids who to root for, and they do the exact opposite. So,
It's funny. I was telling someone the other day, I feel like even in this role, I've had more parents reach out to me to try to get their children jobs, entry-level positions, internships, which is a very different world. But it's like, hey, my kid really wants this. I was like, well, have your kid reach out to me. But it's such a different, and it's the parenting, it's the helicoptering, but all those things are shifting and shaping the mindsets of our future consumers.
I agree. I go to Starbucks, I make my kids order, they don't want to.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, you kidding me?
My daughter wants to know why I can't just get Instacart. Like, do we have to go to the grocery store? Can't they just bring
Yeah.
it? I'm like, just wow.
Exactly. All right. I could keep going all day, but we do want to open up questions to folks in the audience. So please raise your hand. Here's a mic. What do you have? Over there? Let me speak loud. All right.
Go for
Speak
it.
loud. All right.
It's really good learning about your journey and career. My question would be, what's some of the best advice you've ever gotten? And then what's some of the worst advice you've ever gotten?
Ooh, good question. I'll start with the worst advice. When I was at Turner, there was a woman who was a senior leader at the time, and I told her I was very driven. So I was always looking to what's the next thing. I finished grad school, I got this next job, I want the next job. And she's like, Melissa, you will never be anything unless you move to New York or LA. Because especially in entertainment at that time, everything production-wise for Turner's brands happened in LA and all the sales happened in New York. So she was very focused on you won't ever be able to succeed with a career in entertainment if I didn't move. And I was not trying to leave Atlanta. I'm not a fan of New York, and LA was not my jam. So I didn't do that, and that woman got laid off well before me, and I'm not sure where she is today. I'm not saying anything about that. The best advice I've ever gotten, I think we were just talking about it outside actually. So Steve Conan, who you may have heard last night, when I started as an intern in TNT marketing, he was the president of TNT. Never worked for him until I came to the Atlanta Hawks, but as an intern, he asked every single intern to meet with him just to see how their internship program was going. And so when I met with him, he really nice, you know, everyone was scared of him. I didn't really understand why. But he asked me how it was going. I told him I was learning so much. It was a great team, but no one looked like me in the department. There was one assistant that was a person of color, but other than that, there was no other people of color in the department. And I told him I felt like I needed to assimilate to be able to fit in, to get invited to the happy hours and the lunches and all of that. And he told me then, I think I was 22, best advice ever. He was like, don't you ever feel like you can't be your whole self. And if you don't bring everything that you are to the table every day, you're doing not just yourself a disservice, but our business. So my creative background, my history, my West Indian background, all of these things are what they needed at the time because there was none of that in the marketing team. So that voice needed to be heard. So if I tried to go in a different direction to push that away, I would be making a bad business decision for the business. And I'd never thought of it like that. And it was the best advice I ever got.
Well, just curious with the way that people watch sports now, right? Linear still exists, live TV, but obviously that shift is changing, especially with kids, right? Curious how you're kind of complementing your butts and seats strategy with keeping the fans engaged if they can't make it, or, you know, are you looking towards, you know, this new streaming world to have fans be able to, you know, come to games anywhere they are?
I would love to be able to do that. A lot of our ability to showcase our brand and our games is tied up in licensing and rights, which is what the NBA is. And so much of that is ESPN, TNT is what the league does on a national level. Locally, Bally's is our broadcast partner. So we partner with them in ways where there's Bally Sports Plus, and we're able to work with them and we help them promote to try to get people to pay the subscription to be able to watch it digitally. But and I've just had this conversation with our social team. We really want to highlight our in-game experience so that people know what's there. Now we have every highlight. So if you follow any team on social, you're seeing the game right after it happens in real time. So you got the dunks, you got the final scores, you have all of that, but not what's happening in the building itself. So getting someone to walk up to the 200 level, getting someone to walk on the concourse and talk to fans, or actually doing a test, I believe last game and this game, on fashion, and having someone walk around talk, because people dress up, come to Hawks games on occasion. How do we highlight that, and just letting fans know what that experience is really what we're trying to do. But I really think after we finish this Project Future Fan Study, we'll have a lot more insights that will help us be more intentional. We have a number of series talking about content being king. We've done a lot of that, highlighting players behind the scenes. Fans love after a win when we're able to get in the locker room and they can hear the coach talking to the players in real time. That's great. We don't get that kind of access all the time. So when we have it, we want to capitalize. But outside of that, it's highlighting all the other good stuff we have going on.
I think we have time for one more question.
Yes. Hey, Melissa, I'm Brent Hurd with Overtime.
Yeah. What up, OTE?
Yeah. Yes. So, thinking about basketball, as you see the business and the platform, how are you, as you talk to the team and think about it, how do you see the future of the game and the future of sort of what you do on a daily basis? How does that evolve? What does the game look like, in the next sort of handful of years?
Well, I mean, I think the NBA obviously drives a lot of that. For me, it's interesting how they're creating more tournaments within the season. And so play-in tournament, which is now a known thing, when that started a couple of years ago, people were like, what? You're going to create something at the end of the season? And it really has driven engagement and interest towards the end of the season, where some teams are calling it in and just tanking. Now every game matters. And I think that's important. So looking at how the league decides to do more of that, if they do during the season, to make it more compelling to fans. I know this season at All-Star, there was a lot of conversation around All-Star and what that was and how do you reignite the All-Star game and the slam dunk contest and some of those things. So I'm sure they're going to continue looking at ways that they can kind of tweak that. But we were just talking outside, and I am a basketball fan from the 90s. People were getting killed and murdered, and I loved it, And I feel like now the game is so much more finesse and looking at the players more almost as investments than players. And how do you protect them and preserve it and give them longevity, which I think is super important, especially for the guys. But we've looked at different mixes of how do we change the season, less back-to-backs, like other things. And so in talking to some older players who, were alumni back in the day, they're like, man, these guys were coddled. They got it so easy. But it's a difference. And I think the league obviously is very star-driven. So, where LeBron goes, so do the numbers, so do the ticket sales, so does everything else. And I don't know if we're ever going to get back to full team play versus superstar play, because I think, back to this future fan study, so many things are focused on the individual, social media and the rest. It's how many eyeballs can I gain? How can I monetize that? How can I build my brand? How do I build my content? And so we're going to need to find a way, because we have a lot of players who are much more effective and engaging than a whole lot of teams. And it hurts, especially from our perspective. We get some of that halo effect from those guys. But, as you bringing out those superstars at OTE even younger, they're getting that experience even younger. And so they're growing.